Hi, I'm Heather Fortner, the CEO of Signature FD. The primary benefit to our organization using System and Soul has been the clarity of what we are about, what we are trying to achieve, and how we're going to get there. Before we implemented a framework, our organization was driven by consensus because we are a partnership structure and had evolved over time significantly in growth. And with the number of people involved in the partnership, we were trying to run an enterprise organization based on a consensus decision-making model. And that was really where the crux of the issues in the organization were found. There were 4 of us that made up the executive committee at that time, and we had an advisory board as well. There was no formal governance structure in place. And so every decision that was run through the executive committee really required all 4 of us to get onto the same page. And then once we were on the same page, then we would take decisions to the advisory board and try to get all of those people on the same page as well. And the real issue comes down to people holding truths for themselves, people holding truths for the organization, and then people needing to make decisions where potentially the truths for themselves, but the truths for the organization are in tension. And so when you have not a formal governance structure in place and you have a model of trying to lead by consensus, but there is a tension in the organization that something that might actually be really good for the organization might have implications to people that doesn't necessarily feel good. How do you navigate those tensions? How do you bring about consensus in an environment that is more and more complex? And so what we found was that the organization was moving a lot more slowly than we wanted it to be able to move, because the time spent in trying to gain consensus and to get everyone on the same page, when needs are different, needs of the organization will always be different than the needs of the people in the organization. Navigating that tension was slowing us down enormously. And so creating a governance structure, creating a decision-making structure, bringing help into the mix that didn't necessarily have skin in the game on either side, was truly objective and truly neutral, was what allowed us to have a different conversation. The days before Binge walked in the door were, I would say, extra. They were just extra. There was extra emotion, there was extra conversation, there was extra time spent, there were a lot of side conversations between people. It was just extra. There was extra emotion around the fact that we were struggling to get on the same page, that we had different perspectives and couldn't quite make the decisions that we needed to make, that we knew we needed to make. And so I think before Binge came in, before we decided formally to work with a coach, we knew we needed a path forward. We knew we needed a framework. We were all coming at it from a very different perspective. My training is in professional counseling. Someone else was a CPA, someone else was a CFA, somebody else was a CFP. And so, very technical oriented, very smart, very type A people, but all coming at it with a very different approach to life and to decision making. And so we knew that we needed that grounding framework that gave us rules of engagement, that gave us an ability to get clarity, to parse out what was opinion versus what was fact, that allowed us to get to, even if we disagreed in the room, that we could all walk out of the room in alignment and in support, that we could ferret out where maybe misalignment or confusion or disappointment or sabotage was happening when we walked out of that room, but that we could do it in a way that we could do all of that in a way that still allowed us to preserve the personal relationships with the people in the room. I think there's always hesitation, but not necessarily hesitation in the sense of don't do this. I think there's just hesitation in the sense of will it work? We've tried so many things. We've read all the books. Like, is there really anything that we can do that's going to clean up this mess, that's actually going to level set us, that we can agree to, that will allow us to move forward? Because the reality is that creating that framework requires all of you to check your egos at the door, because the framework is the framework. And if you agree as leaders that we are going to use this process, and we are going to use this framework, and this is going to be the mechanism by which we make decisions in the organization, not sabotaging that, not deciding that you just don't like one thing or another, especially when it's the organization that you founded, respecting that framework, respecting that process, and committing to it for the long haul. That, I think, is more the hesitation, right? Can I give up control? Can I give up ego? Can I give up pride for the benefit of the greater good? And that, I think, is, especially for founders, right? That's the real core. If you're talking about fear, if you're talking about hesitation, if you're talking about any type of not wanting this, if you dig deep enough, that's really what it's about. Yeah, I think the very first thing that changed for us when we implemented the framework was we were all four immediately on the same side of the table. Whereas before, there always had to be one person that was leading and one person that wasn't on the same side of the table with everybody else. And so immediately we were able to align ourselves as leaders of the organization, coming from the same side of the table, looking at issues the same way, aligning ourselves around allowing someone else to carry the mantle of challenging our beliefs, challenging our thought process, introducing new ideas or perspectives, or challenging status quo. Just that piece alone of all of a sudden we all get to stand together, as different as we are, but to have a different kind of conversation and have that conversation led differently for us. It was like we all took a portion of what we were holding and handed it over to someone else for safekeeping. And that weight, the weight of holding that, even for just the moment that we were in the room, the times that we were in the room, because we all had to pick it back up and carry it outside of the room with us, right? But the freedom and the weight lifted in being able to do that, I think was just freeing. So that was one thing. And that alignment of sitting on the same side of the table, right? It helps preserve those relationships that you're desperate to preserve, because these are your people. These are the people you're doing life with. So I think that is the one thing that I would say still holds true today. It was true day one, and it still holds true today. The ability to have someone else normalize what you're going through is a huge weight off, because you can get so far and so deep into your own stuff that either you think you are the only one that has this problem, you're the only organization, you're the only one that has this problem, therefore, you must be completely dysfunctional. Or sometimes it goes the other way, where you're like, well, this is completely normal. This is not dysfunctional at all. And either one, like, and there's a whole gamut, a whole spectrum in between, but either one is probably wrong. It's never the extremes. It's always somewhere in between, and it probably vacillates depending on what issue you're talking about. because everybody's going to be passionate about something else that someone else isn't. And so there's just this, it's like a roller coaster of normalcy and dysfunction and then actual research around what happens to organizations in different stages and phases, right? And so layering all of those things on, understanding the system and where it is today, understanding the different decision makers in the room and the things that matter to them, understanding the trajectory of the organization, understanding what research says about organizational dynamics and organizational structure and really the life cycle of organizations. When you have knowledgeable people in the room that can facilitate all of that, the conversation becomes richer. The perspectives can open up and change in a psychologically safe way that they might not have been able to before. So when you ask about results, I will tell you that being committed to the framework, I look at it as there's really two sets of results. There was the results that you see in the organization itself, in your metrics. We've doubled the organization in 5 years. We've more than tripled EBITDA. We have been able to get abundantly clear about what matters and hold those things sacred. But we're able to hold those things sacred because we have a defined process that we follow that keeps the noise at bay. And so everybody being trained in that process, following that process consistently, doing it religiously in the organization, it allows us to stay very focused on the priority of the organization. And so that clarity, when I talk about having a one-page roadmap for the organization, not only from a day-to-day understanding who we are, why we're doing what we're doing, and what it is that we're actually working towards, but then being able to communicate that with clarity. Because the reality is that people only listen when it actually matters to them. But when you say something over and over and over and over, and you do it with the same words and the same language and the same intention, and the roadmap that they see is the same over and over and over, eventually it becomes part of who you are. And so that clarity has not only driven enormous financial results for us, but the other thing that I think it allows you to do is to develop the talent in the organization in a way that is not confusing, that's not overwhelming, because they're simply coming into a framework that they are already familiar with. So this framework doesn't just hold for people in the organization. This framework is organization-wide, and we have spent years training and aligning, getting clarity, not only on what is the organization doing, who are we, where are we going, what matters right now, but enormous clarity by seat. And so when you are able to take that level of framework and clarity, and you are able to apply it globally at the enterprise level, but then you are able to literally manufacture and define that by seat in the organization, the value in helping people understand the purpose of the seat that they sit in and how it drives value to the organization overall, you have just given enormous clarity around what success means for an individual and for the organization. And my just humble belief is that the majority of humans, when they know and have clarity around what success looks like, they will not only meet it, but they will just blow it out of the water. I would say that if you are thinking about adding System and Soul into your business, one, yesterday was too late, because the clarity for you, the clarity for your team, the clarity around who you are and where you're going, every organization needs that. I think every human needs that. I think every family needs that. I think every community needs that. And so if you don't have that already, Like you need to be running to get to that. I think what you have to hold space for in all of that is the hard that comes with that, because the work that is required to get very clear, and let's substitute another word in there, very honest and very truthful about who you are and what you want and where you're headed and what matters to you. That's hard work to do, especially when you're not just doing it for yourself, but you are doing it for groups of people, for teams of people. And the reality is that when you have clarity around who you are and where you're headed, there will be enormous clarity on the people that don't need to be with you or don't want to be with you or aren't on the same journey. And I think as leaders, sometimes we really hesitate. It is really hard to be so clear about who you are because you want to be everything to everybody. And the reality is that the best organizations aren't that. They aren't everything for everybody. And so there's a natural pruning that happens in your organization when you get really clear about those things. And when you have the courage to be really honest with yourself and do this hard work, because this is not only strategy work, which all of us CEOs love to do. This is inwardly work. And that work not only takes time, but it changes you. It changes you, and therefore it changes your organization. And you have to be willing to stand in that place where you genuinely believe that pruning brings growth. And the pruning feels hard and can be hard, and it can inspire grief, and it can inspire change, and it can inspire excitement, and it can come with its own host of emotions. But the best plants have to be pruned in order to continue to grow in a healthy fashion. And so I would say just hold space for both of those. But if you want growth, this is something you have to do.